Hello and welcome to the garden. Spring is just around the corner and there are lots of signs of growth in the greenhouse here. The parsley is going nuts. Our mizuna is, well, it's a field of mizuna now. It's really thick and most of that growth has come in the last, I would say, 2 weeks, because we practically picked everything. We just left the very center of the plants and they've gone crazy in the last week or so. Let me just turn the camera around. I'll give you a quick peek. So this is the giant Naples parsley. It really is wonderful stuff. The flavor is fantastic. And well, you can see they're pretty vigorous plants. It will not be long before these start to run to seed. I think the daytime temperatures in the greenhouses, they're pretty good. So I would expect these to start running to seed fairly soon. And then over here we've got a sea of mizuna, and I can see that there's at least one going to flower there. So these are not going to be good for long. So these are a crop that we're going to have to use up over the next week or two, and then we'll be able to clear this ground and get it ready for the tomatoes and peppers. In the pot here, I can see a crack across the surface, and that undoubtedly means that somewhere in there, there's going to be, yeah, there it is. Oh, a couple of them. A couple of young potato shoots. So these are just starting to come through now, and I'm going to have to keep an eye on the weather forecast, because if we're going to get a hard frost, then I might fleece these. We don't always need to. Not in the greenhouses. They're up close to the wall here, so they get reasonable protection. A light frost they will get away with, but if there is a big chill coming, then we will give these a little bit of fleece just to make sure they don't get a nip of frost. But yeah, they're just starting to come through. And of course, my favourite sign of the approaching spring is the blossom on the peaches. Now, I think we have enough blossom here if we get a reasonable fruit set, but it's not great this year. This is the worst I've had, and I think the peaches suffered quite a bit last year. The spring was really cold. We had to cover these walls to try and protect the blossom from frost. I mean, it was, while these were in flower, it was going down to -6.5 outdoors, and that damaged some of the early pear blossom. And yeah, it was pretty cold while these were flowering last year. They then got hammered with the red spider mite, almost completely lost their first flush of leaves, and that's a bit of a disaster. It's not likely to kill the plant, but it will weaken it. They have to put energy into growing a fresh batch of foliage, and yeah, it's just not happy. And as a consequence, I think we've got rather less fruit buds than I would normally see. So we've probably got enough to give us a reasonable crop. I mean, these trees in here, they will try to put on far more flower than they can turn into fruit. So potentially it's not a problem. I will usually thin these out quite extensively anyway, so that we get a few good fruits rather than lots of tiny little nasty things that really aren't worth growing. So yeah, they're probably okay, but we've had a lot better. So one of those early spring jobs is to tickle these peaches, and for that purpose I have a soft watercolor brush. This one is a little bit on the big side, but it is very soft, and these bristles pick up tons of pollen. Now, I nearly missed this moment. We've had storms and then power cuts and all sorts of bother, but my wife was in here just the other day giving the potatoes a drop of water, and she said, "Oh, the peaches are in flower." And it just in the nick of time, because if it had been just another few days, there would be some of these blossoms that I wouldn't have got to. So first job today, get the old brush out, do a little bit of hand pollinating. I don't know how well this will show up on the camera. It often has a bit of difficulty focusing close. This camera is really not designed for that. But anyway, the flowers on the peach are ever so attractive, and it's often interesting to take a closer look at various flowers because they will differ in certain ways. So this being a peach, there's only one seed, so there is only one pistil. So that's the female part of the flower, this piece in the center that I'm attempting to point to. So on the end we've got the stigma. That will be slightly sticky, and that's where we're trying to get the pollen grains. So we want one or more pollen grains to get stuck on the end of this stigma here, and that tube, that's known as the style, and when the pollen attaches there, it will grow down the tube, hopefully, to the ovary, where it will result in fertilization. Now, some fruits, such as apples, for example, they've got multiple pistils because they've got more than one individual seed in there. But of course, the peach only has this one in the middle. So everything else around the flower here, those are the male parts, and on the end here we've got the anthers with the pollen. Now, on a really nice, warm, sunny day, there should be plenty of pollen available, but I've already gone over these flowers a couple of times and I'm not sure there's a huge amount available today. The idea is just to brush across them, trying to pick up some pollen on the bristles of the brush and drag them across the stigma there. So we're going to run over these anthers covered in pollen and just make sure we cover that stigma. It's always worth just checking where that is, because sometimes it will lie to one side, and if you're hasty with it, you can miss it. But it should be somewhere in the middle. But you can see on that one there is off to one side. So it's always worth just being a little bit observant and making sure that you give that some attention. Trying to be gentle, not trying to damage anything. Just pick up some pollen. So nothing clever with this job. I'm just going to run over those flowers with the brush and hopefully pick up a bit of pollen and transfer it to the stigma there in the center of the flower. And with a bit of luck, that will result in fertilization. So the peaches, they have perfect flowers, which means they've got both male and female parts, but also they are self-compatible. So you don't have to worry about pollinating from a different variety. The pollen from any one of these flowers is good for pollination, so I can just go over each one in turn. I like to take my time with this sort of job and be quite systematic. If you're darting all over the place, you're going to miss some of them, but a fan is really easy to work with because you can take each branch in turn around the fan. And then there's no danger of missing any. Not a huge amount of pollen. There'd probably be more later in the day. I might come back and do them again this afternoon. So after going over a few flowers, the brush should be covered in a fine golden dust, and well, it's not a huge amount about right this minute. I can see there is pollen on the brush, but it should be better this afternoon. So I'm down here a little bit early at the moment, but it is a glorious day here. Makes a huge change from the rotten weather we've had recently, but the sun is shining, the sky is blue, and it's actually really warm in the greenhouse here. And that's why everything is growing away like mad now. The light levels are improving and the daytime temperatures in here can be really rather toasty. So I will probably come back this afternoon and go over these again, because there should be more pollen available to move around. And if it's a really good day, then the brush will be absolutely covered with it. And there's very little you can do about it. If the weather is dull for the whole period when they're in flower, there will often be a limited amount of pollen, but you can only work with what you've got. If you get the chance to pick a day to go tickling the peaches, then a nice warm sunny day is what you need. There was a comment a couple of weeks ago on one of my older peach videos, and there was a question as to whether you could tell when the flower was successfully pollinated. And unfortunately, the answer is probably not in time to be useful. So the petals will start to fall on those flowers, of course. In fact, some of them are already falling, and many of those will fall before the later flowers have even started to open. So it's spread out over quite a period. Entire flowers will then drop off if they haven't been successfully fertilized. And around that sort of time, if you take a close look down at the center of the flower, if it has been pollinated, you can start to see a slight swelling of the ovary, and of course eventually that will turn into the entire fruit there. But you can spot that surprisingly early on if you take a close look right down into the heart of the flower, and as soon as you see that starting to swell, then it's almost certain that that has been successfully pollinated. That does not mean that you're going to get a fruit there, because they tend to set more fruit than they can really carry, and there will be a natural and an unnatural thinning of the little fruitlets. So if you just leave them, you'll see that some are developing better than others, and the small ones, well, the tree is going to eventually abort those and just not continue with their development. That's entirely normal. So out of all of the flowers that are here now, there's a portion of them will be successfully pollinated, hopefully a reasonable proportion, and then of those, a certain amount of those will be naturally aborted by the tree for a variety of reasons. And then there will be an unnatural thinning when I take a look at what's looking good and decide which ones to keep. So I will space out the fruit and take the best looking ones. So that loss of fruit at sort of every stage from blossom through to final fruit, that's entirely normal. So yeah, you can, if you take a very close look down in the center of the flower, you can see that it's been fertilized pretty early on, but not so quick as to tell you when you need to stop tickling them. So ideally you would do this regularly throughout the flowering period. So anyway, that is it for this little glimpse of almost springtime here in the kitchen garden, with the growth of the crops and the potatoes just coming through, and then the blossom on the peaches. So that's it for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.